That was in July of 1864. By September 2nd, Atlanta's Mayor James Calhoun rode through town on horseback with a white flag of surrender. That was more than 100 years ago, but the war left its imprint. For Southerners, the American Civil War is personal, not just because the South lost, but because it was fought here on Southern soil. 4 years of war, over 6,000 battles and skirmishes, more than 600,000 Americans dead. In the end, the lost cause of slavery also died. Beverly M. DuBose III, Beau to his friends, is the descendant of Georgia slave owners. His great-grandfather fought in the Civil War.
This is called a 12-pound Napoleon.
And today, few Americans know more about the Confederacy and the war between the states than Beau DuBose. He's studied it. He's dug for it.
I remember as a 6-year-old, my job was to carry the shovel.
Along with his late father, DuBose amassed an amazing collection of Civil War artifacts. Literally thousands of pieces picked off such battlefields as Shiloh, Vicksburg, Antietam, and Gettysburg. There are mini balls or bullets, guns, buckles, plates as they were then called. To locate then 80-year-old battles on modern terrain, the DuBoses consulted maps, war records, and regimental histories. This one's called Campaigns of the Civil War.
3 o'clock in the afternoon was the time set for the crossing. At that hour, a careful reconnaissance from the top of the ridge showed that there was no symptoms of alarm on the opposite bank.
Union General William Tecumseh Sherman had just spied the coveted prize of the campaign, Atlanta, which he would later leave in flames. The DuBose collection does not stop with what could be scavenged, but also includes what's been bought from dealers and gathered from descendants of Civil War soldiers. For example, Frank Armstrong Moses Jones from Tennessee carried this 4x4 Confederate battle flag when he was wounded. Those dark spots you see are his blood. The collection is 80% Yankee, 20% Confederate. That's because the North left a lot behind and because the North was far better supplied. You can even see this in the quality of their gear. Here's a Yankee mess kit, and this one belonged to a rebel soldier. To win, the Union relied on total warfare. The tragic struggle was fought tooth and nail.
But it still displayed the determination and the will that makes America what it is today. And that was true of both sides.
The DuBose collection is also full of personal camp items. A soldier's housewife's bag that was for needle and thread. Here's a shaving kit. And this is a bottle of stomach bitters said to cure all camp maladies. Really, a couple of swallows of cheap gin. Despite the enormity of the collection, here you can also find the human scale to the war. From uniforms, pictures, even a deck of cards, Beau DuBose can reconstruct one family's history of the Confederacy, the Branch family, John, Hamilton, and Sanford.
For here is Hamilton in his uniform as a member of the Oglethorpe Light Infantry, and that's his uniform here behind me. But during the course of the war, John Branch, the older brother, was killed at the Battle of First Manassas. The second brother, Sanford, was wounded at Gettysburg and captured. And Matthew Brady took the photograph of him lying in front of the hospital tent and sent it to his mother so she would know that he was well. And these cards were actually used by the officers who were imprisoned there. This one is unusual because it says J. O'Brien, traitor.
And of course, nothing tells the drama of war like the words of its greatest players. We don't know to whom Confederate General Robert E. Lee wrote this letter, but we know when, shortly before he surrendered to Grant. It was the spring of '65.
The Army, your desire to pull back your forces to Indian Creek, meet with my approval, you may proceed at once. R.E. Lee, General. And this is obviously one of the last orders that he wrote while in command of the Confederate forces.
Another Civil War battle is remembered every year, but chances are you have never even heard of it. Most history books don't mention it. The battlefield is in what is now New Mexico. And as James Hattori reports, a recent discovery there has touched off a new battle.
Santa Fe seems a long way from the Civil War, but the discovery of a mass grave and the remains of Texas Confederate soldiers has rekindled passions of another time. It was not far from town. A key battle 126 years ago brought an end to the Confederate march on the west.
We call it the Battle of Glorieta, only half facetiously, the Gettysburg of the West.
Historian Don Alberts chronicled the fighting on this rocky field. Paintings depict 1,200 Texans charging the Union troops, but the Confederates were forced to retreat after Unionists burned their supplies. Some 100 men died. The discovery of the gravesite has prompted sharp debate over where the men should be laid to rest and under whose flag.
The Confederate soldiers didn't die in defense of the United States government. They died for a cause that they believed in at that time.
This modern-day battle isn't over ideology, but rather geography. Some feel the soldiers should be buried here at the Texas State Cemetery in Austin among 1,600 of their Confederate brothers. Others argue the soldiers should be buried where they fell.
We think that this is the spot in the United States where they made their ultimate contribution and where they should be memorialized.
Both sides have written the New Mexico State Museum asking for the remains.
I don't think it makes too much difference where the final reinterment of these men are, as long as they are treated with respect, as long as they're treated with honor.
It's where we came from. It's what our grandfathers believed and thought strongly enough about to die for.
The grandsons feel strongly enough about keeping the memory of Glorieta alive that they stage an annual reenactment of the battle. As for the battle over the remains, the museum trustees could decide by the end of the month. To some, it all may seem an obscure footnote in a history book, but to others, what happened at Glorieta is what made America. James Hattori, CBS News, Austin, Texas.
The Civil War was fought in part over the slavery issue. What is often forgotten is that blacks did some of the fighting. Frank Currier reports now on one effort to preserve the memory of black soldiers and their contribution to the Union Army.
Few travelers along this quiet stretch of New Jersey farm country realize they've just passed an historic landmark. It's because these Civil War graves are as neglected as the history of the black soldiers buried there.
I had never heard anything about any black soldiers, but the only way I heard about it was through my relatives. But
Abel Bryant is 75. He has relatives buried here. Back in school, he says, there was never a mention about black soldiers in the Union Army.
How I understood at that time, if I hadn't been told different, that was all white soldiers that freed the slaves.
It is a common misconception, but the truth is, throughout the Civil War, blacks answered the call to arms. More than 180,000 enlisted, serving in segregated combat units known as the colored troops.
They were given a chance to fight, to prove that they were men, and they did it with honors, and they were proud soldiers, they were fierce fighters. They were fighting for more than the land. They were fighting for human dignity.
And they paid dearly. More than 38,000 died at a rate 40% higher than for white troops. Oftentimes, the Confederates would treat black soldiers as fugitive slaves and kill them instead of taking them prisoner.
Their forefathers were warriors not only in Africa.
Ella Boykin is a teacher who lives near the abandoned black gravesite and says it's important for black students to know about it.
We never said no when we were called on to fight for freedom, to die for freedom. And to know that my ancestors had a part of that gives me the utmost pride and respect.
Volunteers soon will begin clearing decades of underbrush from around hidden grave sites, a project to restore dignity and rediscover history in a little cemetery that once honored America's forgotten black soldiers of the Civil War. Frank Currier, CBS News, New York.
The anniversary ceremonies at Gettysburg will climax later this year with a reenactment of Lincoln's famous address. Lincoln reminding Americans of the unending struggle to preserve the freedom on which this country was founded. The the freedom Americans celebrate.